It's called
Don't do a podcast about food and history. This is like the best and the worst idea ever. I can't cook. We're 3 episodes in. Hurry! I just ripped my top. No, because I actually feel like I'm failed.
Welcome to Gobs Goblets, the food and history podcast that is presented by me, Maddie.
And me, Hannah.
Today we're going to be talking about churros, but I feel like it's right to give a bit of a story to say exactly why we're doing this. And if you can't tell by my top, then you need to get your eyes tested.
For our listeners,
sorry, not to exclude you. I am wearing a top that says I Heart Barcelona, and you can see even the heart is ripped because either I don't know how to use a washing machine properly, or it's representing how I felt when I had to leave Barcelona.
Yeah.
So we actually moved there and lived there together for a
month.
month. Yeah, and that was the second time we've gone there together.
Yeah.
Love the city, but a big staple of our diet was churros.
Massive staple.
So we found the best places.
Yeah.
Ate it basically every day.
However, our favourite place and the best place in Barcelona that we think, and also I think everyone else thinks, it's the Churreria Leitana, that one. Best one. It was closed for most of the time we were there, so we only ended up going there that one time.
But we did find another place.
We found another, which was really good.
And, you know, all the churro eating, it inspired us to make today's episode.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Without further ado, should we get into the history
Let's
of it?
do it.
So we're actually going to go quite far back to the beginning of the Portuguese Empire. And I know you're probably thinking, oh, what does that have to do with it? It's just giving you a backstory, mate. So, the Portuguese Empire originally started because of the re-Christianization of the Iberia lands. So, beforehand, it had been run by Muslims, and it was, had North African influence, but they wanted to, as I said, re-Christianize it and make it Catholic. So in 1415, this was the first sort of pivotal moment because they had managed to kick out the Islamic beliefs, and they then wanted to try and overthrow parts of North Africa, which they successfully did for one city called Ceuta, which was a harbour dock, and it was very convenient for them because it meant that they had a bit of land in North Africa. Now, they couldn't proceed to go any further into North Africa because it was so well protected by the Muslim territories that were around. However, it was a really key factor into then the flow and the movement of the empire beginning. So it started with Prince Henry the Navigator. Now he was really curious, I know, what a name.
Yeah, I know.
He was really curious to see how far the Islamic states went down to more like southern Africa. So he started out some like sails to go and see how far they could get down to develop trade relations with other places in Africa. And he was able to get down to about the sub-Saharan area, and there they were able to get gold and cotton and pepper and ivory and sugar and all these like incredible resources that they were then able to take back to Lisbon and start the trading systems there. Very, very important because it started making money for, trade and building relations. Over the next couple of decades, they managed to travel further and further south, and they were collecting and trading goods, but I think it's also important at this point to mention that this was where the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade happened, which was obviously a devastating part of history. Just sort of like, we're not really talking about it in this episode, but just for reference, just so people know that it wasn't, necessarily positive. In fact, a lot of it was really the opposite. But yeah, they managed to keep going further and further south, and they would mark off their territories with these big crosses with Portuguese inscriptions in like on the crosses.
Yeah.
Then Bartholomew Diaz, who was one of the sailors, he managed to get down to the very tip of Africa, and there he was able to see how to sort of get into Asia. Then around 4 years later, Christopher Columbus was also trying to find India and sort of like the Asian area. Don't describe it like that, Maddie, but you know what I mean.
The continent, yeah.
But instead, he actually ended up going to what's now known as America. So, because he had travelled that way, he wanted to colonise it and call it Spanish, basically. But the Portuguese weren't really sure where Asia ended and America started, so they ended up drawing 2 lines on a map to say this part is Spanish and this part is Portuguese. Another thing that had happened at the time was the Portuguese had started venturing out to sort of their own uncharted territories, and they found Madeira and the Azure Islands, and that was like the first expansion really of like their countries, and they became part of the Portuguese Empire. But going back to sort of Asia and travelling that way, they were able to reach the south coast of India, which was, you know, they thought this was going to be great. Like, they had so much to offer, but what they had brought wasn't necessarily of any interest to the Asian population that were living there.
Yeah.
They kind of saw the goods and they're like, we don't really feel the need to trade.
Yeah.
So the Portuguese left sort of empty-handed, and they ended up going back through what was monsoon season, which was dreadful. Don't think many of them actually made it back, but when they did get back, they had a real hero's welcome, and everybody was so glad to see them, but they didn't really have much to bring. So it was sort of like a rejig, how can we do this? Like, and, you know, bring things through. Obviously, at the time we've established, it was now a Christian area, so the monarchy and priests, they wanted to send missionaries over to Asia to convert people and to bring the word of God, which they then did, but in certain areas, especially a place called Goa, there was a lot of violence used, and there was a lot of persecution for the Hindus that were living there at the time. It meant that, you know, the Portuguese just basically ended up conquering and changing the system of beliefs that was had there. Which is obviously very not nice.
No.
I'm
to put it
half
kindly.
Goan, by the way.
Shout out Goa.
Yeah, so they were able to do that, and they were able to take the resources that they needed and took it back to Portugal, which was now a place where there was a lot of trade going on. It was a bit of a hot spot, but they kept expanding, and then they moved forward into China.
Yes.
And now this is where our story of churros actually starts.
Dun, 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 dun.
It was a bit of a long intro and a long-awaited, you know.
But history's like
moment.
that.
It is. It's all about like the building blocks of life, and
Yeah.
and this is where they discovered what is now known as a modern-day churro. Well, not quite. It was prehistoric churro.
Yes.
But Hannah's going to start talking a bit more about the food.
I am indeed. So I'll start off about what there is in Spain.
Yep.
And then that's going to swiftly move into China. So what we have in Spain, we have churros, which are most commonly known, and then we have porras. Now, a lot of people don't actually know about porras, but any churros place that you actually go to, they should serve porras. So they're very similar. They're imagine like the lime and lemon. They're from the same family, but they're also very different.
I was going to say, basically, every time we went to get churros, Hannah doesn't like, I'm going to butcher it, Hannah's Spanish and I'm not, porras.
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 Yeah.
See,
if it's
we
2
will
R's,
need
you...
that. But we never get them.
No, we never get the porras. I know a lot of my family actually prefer porras, but I prefer churros. So anyway, the main difference is porras, you use baking powder. Now, the reason you use this is because the texture in porras, it's much more airy, it's less dense. If you get a churro, it's usually smaller in width and more dense, whereas a porra, is lighter and kind of more airy. So they use baking powder in porras. Also, churros are shaped almost like a star. If you look at them, they have the lines. Porras are not. I mean, they usually cook them in a spiral. You see pictures of them, a massive spiral, but they haven't got any shape to them. It's like a tube. Imagine a tube. So Porras are actually very similar to a very popular Chinese breakfast fritter called youtiao. Now, youtiao is usually served with either congee, rice congee, or soya milk. Now, rice congee, also known as juk or Chinese rice porridge, is basically a savoury rice porridge, and you cook rice with a lot of water and you let the rice soften and you let the starch do its thing, and then what the starch will do is it helps thicken it, make it into a really like silky consistency. So it's imagine like a really silky porridge.
Oh.
So that's what I really want to try it. I think it sounds really, especially with
Next
soya milk.
episode.
No, I know. But yeah, but in Spain we have churros or porras, usually with like a thick chocolate or with coffee, you would dip it in. So where did it come from? Did Spain steal China's dessert? What actually happened? The truth is we don't actually know. So there's no actual accounts of whether it was Portugal who did it first, whether it was Spain, whether it was China. We just know that dough has existed for many, many centuries, sweet fried dough, and it could have been in any of these places. Youtiao, however, has a really interesting story behind it. Now, whether it's actually fact or fiction, I'm not entirely sure. Some sources say it's folklore.
Okay.
Other sources actually state it as if it were history. So we have two main characters in this story. We have Yu Fei, a very well-respected general in China. Now, he was well-respected due to his military expertise, and he was like this icon for patriotism. And we had Xin Kuai. Now, Xin Kuai was involved in the politics world. Xin Kuai was very jealous of Yu Fei, and him and Xin and his wife basically came up with a plan to murder Yu Fei. How did they do this? They framed him for treason. Now, back in the day, if you were framed for treason, you would have been imprisoned and you also would have been executed. So Xin won in terms of Yu Fei was now out of the picture. However, karma bit Xin in the arse, essentially, to put it frankly. So people basically found out that Xin had done this. They were not happy about it. I mean, Yu Fei was this icon to people. He was really loved and respected, and people thought this was the ultimate betrayal. He started getting these really nasty nicknames, and he's now known in Chinese culture and history as a traitor. So basically there was a street vendor, and allegedly this street vendor was so angry about what had happened, he had some dough, and what he did, whether it was actually twisted or two doughs stuck together, because if you look at youtiao nowadays, it's basically two kind of lines of dough stuck together. What it was supposed to symbolise was Xin and his wife holding hands, and he was essentially frying the dough. So imagine like that's what he wanted to do to them, like basically.
Oh my gosh, is it like voodoo?
Well, almost could have been. He basically, but with dough, Voodoo for dough. He was so angry, and then the dish became really popular because it was actually quite delicious, but also it was this statement for political injustice.
That's fascinating. See,
yeah.
Food is so much. Food is politics. It's life.
You wake up in the morning, you pour your cornflakes in the bowl. I bet you don't even think about where they came from, or your youtiao, or your porras, or your churros. There's a lot behind them, is the honest truth. Anyway, so that's a bit of the story, that's a bit of the context. I'm going to go more into like the actual food making now. So we have our churros. So with our churros, I used a recipe actually from San Ginés, is the churro place in Madrid that is the most popular one. It's been open for years. And this recipe they've been using since 1981. It's really simple because nowadays...
1981?
Yeah.
Oh, that's quite recent.
It's quite recent, the recipe, but it's the most kind of, old recipe I could get that was accurate in a way. So what they use is 1 cup of flour, 1 cup of water, and a pinch of salt. So what you have to do is you have to kind of bring the water to a boil. You need to add the salt. And then once you see that it's about to come to the boil, but it's not boiled yet, you need to add the flour, and you need to have good arms for this. I haven't been to the gym in a minute, so I was struggling. So I had to quickly mix the flour. You then have to turn it off the heat. And once you see it basically coming off the walls, you just keep going. And then you need to wait for it to form a dough. So once a dough has been formed like a ball, you then put it in a bowl. And you have to leave it for 10 minutes. Mine messed up. There wasn't enough water. I don't know if the heat was too much. We had to make a second batch essentially. So crew helped me out. We made a second batch.
I tried to make the first batch work. I promise you, given me 10 more minutes, and it would have been...
It was just looking wrong. So then the chocolate, how we did the chocolate. So this recipe is from a man called Antonio Colmenero de Ledesma. He was a physician and surgeon from Andalusia in Spain. And in 1631, he published one of the first ever treatises of the benefits of chocolate. This included a variety of recipes for how to make it from the cacao bean and how to spice it for optimal flavour and medical benefits. The treatise was translated into English in 1652 by Captain James Wadsworth. So, what you will need for this: 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of nutmeg, 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves, 1/4 teaspoon of ground annetto. Now, annetto we did not use because I'm not spending £7 on a 1/4 teaspoon. We're in a cost of living crisis.
What is it though?
Donate to our GoFundMe. What it is, Maddie, it's a natural orange red food colouring and condiment that comes from the seeds of the Archie oak tree, I'm really sorry if I'm butchering that, native to the tropical regions of South America. You then proceed with 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper, 1/4 teaspoon of ground aniseed. Now, I imagine the spices were put in as beneficial, as we know nowadays. A lot of spices have a lot of benefits, so this is why. You then have 4 ounces of dark chocolate. This equates to 113 grams of chocolate. We used 100. 4 cups of water, half a cup of granulated sugar, or 1/4, depending how sweet you like this. Because back in the day, you would have had your chocolate bitter. It wasn't like a sweet thing. That's how the drink was enjoyed.
Oh.
It was a bitter chocolate.
Oh.
Yeah. And then...
hesitant now.
Yeah, we're going to try it soon. And then 2 teaspoons of pure vanilla extract. Once you do all of that, you just boil the water and you whack it all in and you mix it and you keep whisking and whisking and whisking. And then when you see that it's starting to froth, it's ready. So... that's how we did the chocolate. Now, obviously, this chocolate was much more liquidy. In the modern day, it's like much more thick. If you go to Spain, it's a very thick chocolate. It should run off. It should like drip off.
Yeah.
But back then, that's the recipe.
I wonder why they didn't use milk.
Yeah.
bizarre.
Do you know what the recipe did say? You can actually use milk.
Right.
But I wanted to try with water.
Right. So you're just setting me up for failure at this point.
No. Because Maddie can't drink milk.
That's true, actually. Yeah.
So I did it.
I can't eat gluten and I can't drink milk, but here we are on a cooking show.
I did it to be considerate.
Thank you, darling.
You're welcome. If you want to make churros or porras, I do have some top tips.
Oh boy.
So, for churros, you want to make sure that your oil is really hot. Key. Second, you want to make sure your flour is dry. Now, I know that sounds absolutely ridiculous. Flour is dry. Well, actually, it can actually have a lot of humidity in it. Mm-hmm. So the way you get rid of this humidity is you put it in the oven at a really low temperature for about half an hour. That'll dry it out. That'll also mean that the churros don't absorb as much oil.
Okay.
So make it crispier, better. We don't like a soggy churro.
Nobody likes a soggy churro.
No one does. And then finally for porras, it's recommended to use kind of really glutinous flour, so high gluten content and extra fine. So there are some top tips for you.
Just want to add a quick little fun fact
Go
to
on.
our, just to round off before we try.
Yeah.
There is actually another tale about how churros came to be.
In Spain. Because we haven't even got there.
We've touched on everywhere but Spain.
Yeah.
But no, so basically there were a group of nomadic people that lived in the mountains.
Yeah.
And obviously when you're living so far out from civilization, you're not going to be able to get down to the bakery to get like a quick little sweet treat. Mm-hmm. So what they would do is, because they'd have access to sort of flour and like the essentials, they would then deep fry these churros. And this is where the idea came from.
Yeah.
Also, the churros look like horns.
Yes, they did. The sheep, this is actually, I do know this. So the sheep were called Navajo churro. They were literally called churro. And these derived from the chura sheep. And the chura sheep were the ones that had horns that similarly looked like churros. So that's why people think they get the name. So we don't know if it was Portuguese sailors. We don't know if it was Spanish shepherds. We don't know if it was an angry Chinese street vendor. whoever it was.
This is more of a mystery episode.
It is.
To be honest.
It is.
You can't, this thing, history, you're not always going to know anything.
You're never going to actually know what happened. Well, with some things you do. But yeah, in this case, it's still a mystery to modern day.
But what won't be a mystery very soon is how good Hannah's churros, the second batch, turned out.
Yeah,
so,
I'm gonna put my hair up. We're gonna fry them, and we're gonna reheat the chocolate and give it a taste. Also, I don't have a star-shaped oh my god, a star-shaped tip. Usually, you'd have the big machines, and you do like that, and then the churros come out. Again, no budget for that, and they wouldn't have had that back in the day. So yeah, didn't have a star-shaped nozzle. So I'm either gonna have to do it by hand or in a plastic bag. So we're gonna experiment and see how it goes. Hi guys, and welcome back to episode 3 of Gobs and Goblets. Today, I think I failed as a Spaniard. I attempted to make churros, and as you can see from my crying and the shaking, it didn't quite go to plan. We are going to taste test. Also, I have very sensitive eyes. The oil is affecting us all. Our crew is crying in the back. We've suffered for this.
It's quite smoky because my eyes are quite, they're not very sensitive.
They're not.
Hannah's are.
The streaming. But I say we try it. We've suffered this much.
Here we have some chocolate soup.
This is medicinal chocolate.
It's not chocolate soup actually. It's chocolate water.
In modern day, it's now much thicker the chocolate. However, it would have been much liquidier back in the day. Right.
Cheers.
Go for it. Ooh, they feel quite, fatter than a normal churro. These look more like porras.
Sorry, everybody's wiping their eyes behind the camera.
I don't really have any words.
I can't open my eyes.
Not our cameraman. Binning. Yeah, please do.
I didn't think I was gonna cry.
Let me try the chocolate.
Oh no, I've done my makeup.
A very spicy hot
Does anybody
chocolate.
have a tissue? Because I can't open. Is that your old tissue?
My current tissue.
This is
so
a
sorry
low
for our
point.
listeners. This is a lot of screaming. We tried to make churros. It didn't really go to plan. Thanks so much for watching our episode. Please tune in for next week where hopefully, Maddie, please you start doing the cooking because I can't do it anymore.
I've turned into a snotty mess and I'm using your second-hand